Tokyo is reporting its highest number of new COVID cases in 6 months, with the Olympics just around the corner. The numbers there are still low compared to some other countries, but several athletes are now in isolation. James Longman is there in Tokyo with the latest.
This morning, with the Olympics just over a week away, Tokyo is setting the wrong kind of record, reporting the highest number of new COVID cases in almost 6 months. At over 1,000 daily cases, the numbers are low compared to other countries, but they're going in the wrong direction. And with only 16% of Japanese people fully vaccinated, new outbreaks are causing concern, with several athletes in isolation after being near someone who tested positive. Overnight, sources have confirmed to ESPN that Team USA's Bradley Beal entered health and safety protocols at the camp, raising the possibility that the basketball player may have to miss the games. And it's getting clearer just how different these games are going to be. No fans, no high fives, and now a new first. Winning athletes will have to put medals around their own necks. And overnight, ABC News was with the US gymnastics team as they boarded their plane to the Games. 5-time Olympic medalist Simone Biles telling our Kaylee Hartung that even though these Olympics will be different, she's ready.
There will be no crowd. We'll kind of be sanctioned to our rooms. But other than that, it's still the Olympics, so we're excited.
And James Longman joins us live from Tokyo. James, thanks for being here. We heard in your piece there that several athletes are now in quarantine after being near someone else who tested positive. So what happens in those situations? Can they still compete? And what happens if an athlete themselves tests positive?
Hi, Diane. Yeah, so there are two slightly different situations. If an athlete tests positive, what the Olympics say, what the International Olympic Committee say, is that that person won't be disqualified, but they'll be known as a did not start, DNS, which means that someone else from their Olympic squad can take their place. But things start to get a bit tricky if you're in a team. And for instance, you mentioned there that there are some teams isolating, like the team who are competing under the Russian Olympic Committee flag. Of course, Russia doesn't compete as a country anymore because of the doping scandal, but the sevens team, the women's rugby sevens team for Russia, they are in isolation because their masseur tested positive. Now, if another one of that team tests positive, sevens is played in a formation. You have certain positions. Will they have endless numbers of people who can come in to fill those different positions? The South African rugby team are in a similar position. They're in isolation as well because someone on their flight over here tested positive. We hear that members of the Brazilian judo team are also in isolation. I mean, look, it depends on the sport, but you can well imagine there's a big issue if, particularly during COVID, a lot of Olympic delegations haven't travelled here with huge benches, huge subs, numbers of reserves. And so, you know, it depends on the sport, but if one athlete is out because they're near someone who's tested positive or they have tested positive, it might not be that anyone can replace them.
And James, are they able, presumably they're not able to practice when they're in this kind of quarantine. And I know one of the other big changes is that the winners this year will have to put the medals around their own necks. So how different is this whole experience going to be for these athletes who've been training for years for this?
Yeah, Diane, already very, very different. I mean, yeah, training camps have already been cancelled here. A Serbian delegation, the member of their team tested positive and their whole training camp was cancelled. Obviously, training for the Olympics is much more than just the 5 or 6 days before your event, or it should be at least, one would hope. So one imagines that they'll be in pretty good nick, but I think psychologically it is difficult. I mean, Simone Biles spoke to ABC News just before she flew here to Tokyo, and she said her parents have never missed her compete, but they will miss these Olympics. And that, I think, is probably the same for a lot of these athletes. Remember, a lot of them don't have her experience. A lot of them are very young. A lot of them, their coaches are their parents, and a lot of them just won't have that kind of support network. So I think that is going to be difficult. But you might say, actually, they don't have the distractions of Tokyo. They just focus on the sport, and we might see more records being broken. Who knows?
And James, the opening ceremony is just a little over a week away now. What can we expect that to look like?
Well, I mean, that moment where they all walk around and they wave, I don't know who they're going to be waving at because the stadium's going to be almost entirely empty. Normally opening ceremonies are pretty secret, and this one, that goes for this one as well. What we do know, though, is there are concepts, and they've released the statement saying that this year the concept is going to be moving forward, which apparently celebrates a world united against the virus. And they have another concept called United by Emotion, which is the idea that we may not be together in person because of social distancing and because of this virus, but we can all be united in our excitement and our joy for the Olympics. So these are going to be the messages of the opening ceremony. We'll see the Olympic mascot, Miratoi, which is the Japanese phrase for future, eternity and hope. So I think there are little moments we've heard about, but we don't know too much about what the actual kind of an opening ceremony itself is going to look like, because these things are normally pretty secret.
And James, is there a plan for if cases in Tokyo keep climbing? Could we see more dramatic changes to the restrictions here, or do you think all events will still go on as planned?
Well, I think the Olympic Committee and Tokyo 2020 are keeping those sorts of things pretty close to their chest because they don't want to cancel things. I mean, what they're doing is closing down certain areas. So the waterfront, for instance, here, which was going to be open to the members of the public, is now no longer going to be one of the last remaining areas where people in Japan could have gone along. So I think in that respect, they're going to make changes. But when it comes to cancelling events, you know, the thing we've heard time and time again from the IOC and from Tokyo 2020 is, even though this is going to be a very different Olympics, even though we're not going to have spectators, even though we're not going to have any high fives, and we're not going to have any hugging, we are going to have a full roster of events. And I think if we start to see events cancelled, then this really will become a nightmare Olympics. Dan?
Fingers crossed. I think everybody's got fingers crossed now that at this point that doesn't happen. But James, we also hear today is your Freedom Day, where you finally get to get out of quarantine. So I hope you finally enjoy leaving the threshold of your hotel room and get to enjoy the city a little bit.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dan. And actually, now we have a professional cameraman here at last. My camera skills when I was last talking to you were not great, so now we have Jamie.
I thought you did great, James, and we appreciate it nonetheless. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.